"No one cares about you," he whispered, and I felt every word like ice sliding down my spine. I was sitting in the corner of the office break room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, my hands wrapped tightly around a lukewarm cup of coffee, the steam barely warming my fingertips. Outside, the city hummed, neon signs reflecting off rain-slicked streets, a soft blur of headlights and traffic sounds leaking through the half-open window. Every shift I worked, every class I attended, felt like it added up to nothing here, like my presence was invisible, and tonight was no different. The laughter of my co-workers from the main floor cut through the room like a knife, a harsh reminder that I didn't belong, that I was just a shadow they could ignore. "My name is Emily Carter, 24, barely scraping through my nursing program while juggling 3 part-time jobs, and I had convinced myself I was used to feeling small, accustomed to the sting of being overlooked, but tonight it landed heavier than ever. The moment felt suspended, a slow stretch of seconds where every breath was amplified, every heartbeat loud in my ears. That's when I noticed him, Liam Donovan, stepping into the break room doorway, the polished black leather of his shoes gleaming under the buzzing lights, his dark suit perfectly fitted, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the room like he cataloged every fault and flaw. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to look away, to shrink, but something in his presence stopped me. He wasn't part of this office, of this mundane hierarchy. He carried with him a gravity that made the fluorescent lights seem dim, the space smaller, his silence louder than any voice. As he took a slow step forward, the soft click of his shoes against the tile echoed in my skull, reverberating through the pounding of my heart. I wanted to move, to hide, but my body betrayed me, locked in place by a mixture of awe and fear. Liam's gaze fell on me, and I felt stripped of pretense. Every insecurity laid bare under the intensity of those storm-gray eyes. He tilted his head slightly, a subtle shift that made the room feel warmer, smaller, like the world had contracted to the space between us. I swallowed hard, the bitter taste of coffee mingling with the rising tension in my chest, and I realized that he wasn't here to mock or to challenge, but to observe, to see. And in that moment, it was the first time in a long time that I felt seen. The hum of the office machinery faded into background noise, the buzzing of the fluorescent lights a distant echo compared to the thrum of my pulse. He didn't speak yet, didn't move closer too fast, but the weight of his presence pressed against me like a tide, powerful, undeniable, and for the first time in hours, maybe days, I felt a flicker of protection, an unspoken promise that no matter the sneers or the whispers, someone here recognized that I mattered, that I was not alone in the storm of this world. And in that quiet, suspended heartbeat, I realized the night had just begun, and nothing would ever feel quite the same again. The hum of the office faded as Liam moved closer, his shadow stretching across the linoleum floor in a way that seemed to bend the light around him. Every step he took was deliberate, measured, and yet somehow comforting, like a rhythm I had unconsciously been waiting for. My hands tightened around the coffee cup again, feeling the heat seep into my palms, but it was a poor substitute for the warmth radiating from his presence. I dared not speak, dared not even blink too quickly, as if any sudden motion might shatter the fragile tension hanging between us. He reached the corner of the room where I sat, paused, and his gaze lingered on me, scanning, assessing, as though he could see every doubt, every fear, every small victory I had clung to during long, exhausting days. I felt exposed, yet oddly safe, as if the world outside the office no longer mattered. The rain, the traffic, the noise of the city reduced to a distant murmur. Liam finally spoke, his voice low, even, carrying a weight that made every word land firmly in my chest. "You should not be alone here," he said, and I realized that in the midst of countless strangers who had ignored me, who had sneered or dismissed, he had seen me. The office, the break room, the hum of computers, the scattered paperwork, all of it faded into insignificance compared to the clarity of his attention. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the unexpected surge of recognition, a feeling I had not experienced in months, maybe years, that someone noticed, truly noticed. I shifted slightly, careful, testing the boundaries, and he did not recoil, did not retreat. He remained, steady, a pillar of quiet control, and it made the air between us feel both charged and protective. Outside, the rain continued to patter against the glass, a soft rhythm against the city that seemed to mimic the subtle cadence of my heartbeat as I watched him, as I tried to make sense of the storm of emotions rising inside me. I wanted to speak, to ask who he was, why he was here, but the words stuck in my throat, tangled with awe and uncertainty. Instead, I let my eyes follow his movements, the small adjustments of his jacket, the precise way he stood, the quiet authority in every tilt of his head. And then a soft knock at the office door drew my attention for a split second, a mundane interruption that seemed suddenly trivial compared to the gravity of the moment. And when I looked back, Liam was still there, still observing, still emanating a quiet promise that whatever challenges or sneers awaited outside these walls, I would not face them alone. My hands slowly relaxed around the coffee cup, the heat now a background sensation, my senses attuned to every subtle cue, every micro-expression that crossed his face, a mixture of control, assessment, and an unspoken reassurance that made me realize, with a strange, grounding certainty, that tonight, nothing would feel quite the same again. The quiet between us stretched, heavy but not oppressive, filled with the subtle hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant traffic beyond the windows. I could feel Liam's presence like a steady current, constant, unwavering, and it drew my attention as if gravity had shifted. The scent of his cologne lingered in the air, subtle, sophisticated, but not overwhelming, a gentle reminder of the difference between him and everyone else in this office. I shifted slightly, my chair scraping softly against the tile, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness, and he glanced down, eyes sharp but calm, tracking the movement without judgment. For the first time that evening, I felt a strange combination of curiosity and relief, the kind that comes when someone who seems untouchable notices the small details about you. The paper cup trembled in my hands, spilling a few drops of lukewarm coffee onto the floor, and he reached forward instinctively, a measured motion, steadying the cup with his hand near mine. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt through me, a reminder that he was here, tangible and real. Outside, the rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, the neon lights glinting off wet pavement in streaks of pink and orange, and I realized I had not even noticed the time passing. The office clock ignored. The world outside faded to a distant hum. Liam did not speak immediately. Instead, he watched, silently cataloging, giving me the space to process my own thoughts, yet making it clear that he was aware of every hesitation, every flinch, every attempt to retreat inward. I took a slow breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease fractionally, and I found myself daring to look directly at him, studying the subtle expressions that crossed his face, the faint lines around his eyes, the precise way his posture communicated authority without force. In that moment, the hum of fluorescent lights, the tapping of keys from other rooms, even the faint vibration of the city beyond, all merged into a background symphony, leaving only the clarity of his presence and the fluttering awareness of my own heartbeat. The coffee had gone cold, yet I did not care. It was a minor detail, eclipsed by the quiet intensity of the shared space, by the unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted in the balance of this ordinary office night. I felt the initial fear, the small prickling anxiety that had accompanied my shift, start to dissolve, replaced by a tentative curiosity, a sense of anticipation that maybe, just maybe, tonight would not be like every other night, that the presence of one person, observing with calm certainty, could transform the ordinary into something unexpected. Liam shifted slightly, a single step closer, and the room seemed to contract, focusing the energy between us, and I realized that despite the subtlety of his movements, despite the absence of words, he had already claimed the attention of the room, claimed a quiet dominion that was not threatening, but impossible to ignore. My pulse quickened with a mix of apprehension and fascination, and I found my thoughts scattered, attempting to process how the presence of one person could so completely alter the rhythm of a simple night. And as the rain traced slow, glistening paths down the window pane, I felt a tether forming, delicate but undeniable, connecting me to the calm certainty in his gaze, leaving me with the singular awareness that the events of this evening were only beginning, and that the quiet power of his observation would guide the unfolding of every moment to come. The soft hum of the office air conditioning blended with the faint tapping of rain against the window as I watched Liam, every movement deliberate, almost meditative in its control. He had shifted slightly, standing closer now, but not intrusively, and I could feel the energy between us tighten subtly, like a string drawn taut. The fluorescent lights reflected off his dark suit, highlighting the sharp lines of his shoulders and the confident set of his posture, and I felt a mixture of curiosity and cautious awe ripple through me. My fingers traced the rim of my coffee cup absently, the warmth barely registering against the heightened awareness of his presence, and I realized I had been holding my breath for several moments without noticing. The air in the room, charged with something unspoken yet palpable. He glanced at the clock on the wall, his eyes flicking briefly, and I caught a glimmer of calculation, the sense that he was aware of every detail, every second passing, yet he chose to focus on me. The faint scent of his cologne lingered, understated but unmistakable, a rich, earthy note that seemed to anchor the room. And for the first time that night, I felt both small and noticed, a curious juxtaposition that made my heartbeat flutter unpredictably. My thoughts raced, trying to untangle the complex tangle of emotions and instincts that had awakened in his presence, a mixture of trust, curiosity, and a quiet sense of protection that I had not anticipated, and I wondered, for the briefest moment, how one person could command such influence over the subtle rhythm of my awareness without a word spoken. Outside, the rain slowed to a gentle drizzle, the neon reflections on the street forming a mosaic of color and light that seeped into the room through the half-open window, and I felt the pulse of the city merge with the pulse in my chest, a shared cadence that somehow connected the world beyond with this quiet, charged office space. Liam moved again, a small shift, a step forward, and the air seemed to bend subtly around him, each motion precise, each breath measured, conveying calm control without the need for assertion. I could feel the unspoken message in the way he held himself, a promise of steadiness and awareness, and it resonated within me, settling the nervous energy I had been carrying, replacing it with a cautious anticipation. The mundane details of my coffee, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint shuffle of papers on the desks, all faded into the background as his presence filled the room, commanding attention without a sound, and I found my thoughts narrowing, focusing entirely on him, on the subtle cues in his expression, the deliberate pace of his movements, the quiet gravity of his watchful gaze. In that suspended moment, I understood that the ordinary patterns of my evening, the familiar rhythms of exhaustion and unnoticed effort, had shifted irreversibly, and that the presence of one individual, observing with measured intensity, could create a space where the smallest gestures, the slightest movement, became significant, meaningful, and entirely charged with possibility. My hand relaxed on the cup, the heat grounding me as I breathed slowly, feeling a tether form, delicate yet undeniable, a connection that anchored me to this new reality, and I realized, with a quiet certainty, that the night was only beginning, and every moment from this point forward would carry the weight of attention, awareness, and an unspoken promise that could not be ignored. The office had grown quieter, the low hum of computers and distant traffic fading into an almost meditative stillness, leaving only the subtle rhythm of our shared space. I adjusted in my chair, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease slightly as I noticed Liam's gaze shifting, not in judgment, but in careful attention, each movement deliberate and unhurried, as if measuring the room and the space I occupied simultaneously. The glow from the streetlights outside cast long, muted reflections across the linoleum floor, their cool tones contrasting with the warmth of the fluorescent lights overhead, and for a moment, the ordinary world seemed suspended, reduced to the small, charged bubble that encompassed us. I took a tentative breath, the coffee in my hands now forgotten, and felt the subtle gravity of his presence drawing me into a heightened awareness of every small sound, every micro-expression, every shift of weight or posture. Liam moved again, imperceptibly, yet the air seemed to bend slightly around him, a quiet assertion of space without intrusion, and I found myself leaning forward slightly, unconsciously mirroring his stillness, drawn into the cadence of his observation. The details of the office, the faint click of keyboards, the soft whir of the air conditioning, the distant murmurs from other rooms, receded into background noise, leaving the interaction between us as the singular focus of the environment. I felt a wave of understanding wash over me, an awareness that he noticed things that no one else ever had. The subtle hesitation in my movements, the slight tremor in my hands, the careful way I had been trying to compose myself despite exhaustion and self-doubt. Outside, the drizzle had slowed further, the neon reflections on the wet pavement forming soft, fractured lines of color, a visual echo of the suspended tension inside, and I felt a strange sense of alignment, as if the outside world had quieted in response to the energy between us. Liam's eyes flicked toward the window briefly, then back, the brief motion anchoring me to the present, reminding me that he existed in this same reality, steady and commanding, yet considerate of the fragile boundaries of my space. I realized that I was no longer reacting solely out of fear or self-consciousness. I was aware of a subtle comfort in his proximity, an unspoken reassurance that despite the earlier sneers and dismissals, I was being observed with care, and it lent a strange but grounding weight to the moment. Each second stretched, elongated with the precision of attention, the office air dense with anticipation, yet devoid of pressure, leaving room for thought, reflection, and a slow building recognition that the night held something unforeseen, something potent in its quiet influence. I noticed the way Liam's posture subtly shifted as if inviting me to step out of the constant defensive patterns I had held, and I felt a flicker of courage, a tentative willingness to meet his gaze, to acknowledge that he had created a space where my presence mattered. The subtle warmth of the room, the gentle glow of lights on his tailored suit, the measured calm in his expression, all converged into an unspoken message that tonight, the ordinary rules had changed, and that the moments yet to come would carry a clarity and intensity that I could neither ignore nor fully predict, leaving me poised on the edge of awareness, attentive to the quiet promise of his presence. The quiet in the office shifted subtly as Liam stepped slightly closer, his presence no longer just observed but palpably grounding, like a steady anchor in the midst of the dim fluorescent glow. My hands unconsciously tightened around the edge of the desk, feeling the smooth surface beneath my fingertips, yet the tension that had gripped me earlier was now tinged with an unexpected calm, a sense that the space between us was no longer only filled with observation, but also with deliberate protection. Outside, the drizzle had tapered to a soft mist, the neon lights reflecting in the wet streets casting fractured streaks of color into the room, and the faint city sounds, distant horns, the hum of passing traffic, were almost comforting in their constancy. Liam's gaze lingered on me, unwavering yet not demanding, a measured attentiveness that made the hours of unnoticed effort and unseen presence in my life feel acknowledged, recognized, and even valued. I shifted slightly, careful, testing boundaries, and he did not move away. Instead, he allowed the small, tentative movements, acknowledging them without interference, as though giving permission for me to exist fully within the space. Each breath I took felt heavier, more deliberate, filled with a new awareness of the room, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air, subtle and grounding, a warm undercurrent in the sterile office environment. The hum of the computers, the soft flicker of lights, all receded into background awareness as I focused entirely on the subtle cues in his posture. The slight tilt of his head, the measured adjustment of his jacket, the careful placement of his feet on the floor, each conveying a quiet command of the environment and a subtle reassurance that I was under no threat. I dared to meet his eyes, holding the gaze just a moment longer than I should have, and I felt a tether, fragile yet undeniable, forming between us, an unspoken connection that promised awareness, attention, and a silent commitment to presence. The office air, usually tinged with the monotony of fluorescent light and recycled ventilation, seemed charged with possibility, every shadow, every reflective surface catching the faint light in ways that highlighted the shared space, transforming the ordinary into something charged with quiet intensity. I felt my chest lift slightly, the subtle tension in my muscles easing as a sense of anticipation replaced apprehension, a new rhythm settling into the room, syncing with the soft, steady cadence of Liam's movements and attention. Even the small, mundane details, the slight creak of the chair as I shifted, the distant click of a keyboard, now felt magnified, part of a larger pattern, a soundtrack to the silent understanding that had begun to grow between us. The lingering scent, the soft light, the measured control in every subtle gesture he made, all contributed to a heightened awareness that tonight, the ordinary rhythms of the office had been altered irrevocably, and that the moments yet to unfold would carry the weight of this quiet authority, this deliberate attention, and the unspoken promise that I would not face the rest of the night alone. The subtle tension in the room shifted again as Liam took a measured step, the quiet authority in his movement drawing my attention as if the entire space had contracted to the distance between us. I could feel the air changing, lighter yet charged, the soft hum of the office blending with the muted patter of the city rain outside, each drop catching the neon reflections in the street below and scattering them into delicate patterns on the floor. My hands rested lightly on the desk, fingertips brushing against scattered papers, the texture grounding me even as my mind focused entirely on him. He tilted his head slightly, observing with the patience of someone accustomed to reading people, and I felt the subtle pull of curiosity mingled with a cautious relief, a recognition that in his quiet, deliberate presence, the earlier sting of dismissal and neglect no longer held sway. The fluorescent lights above flickered briefly, a soft stutter in the otherwise steady glow, and the moment seemed to stretch, each second elongated, filled with small, imperceptible details, the tilt of his shoulder, the faint crease of his brow, the slight turn of his wrist, that conveyed awareness, assessment, and quiet reassurance without a single word spoken. I realized that I was no longer merely reacting to his presence. I was participating, attuned to the rhythm he set, the subtle cues that guided my attention and gave a sense of control without command. Outside, the drizzle had thinned further, the reflections from streetlights forming fractured, almost painterly lines across the window glass, and I noticed the subtle interplay of light and shadow in the room, how it cast patterns over his suit and the small, careful movements he made. Each breath I took seemed synchronized with the soft cadence of his observation, the pulse of my heart aligning in some unspoken, unforced rhythm with the quiet intensity he projected. I dared to move slightly, adjusting my chair, and he acknowledged it with the smallest of nods, not intrusive, merely a recognition, a subtle reassurance that I could occupy my space safely. The ordinary elements of the office, the hum of computers, the shuffle of papers, the faint sound of footsteps in distant corridors, faded into the periphery, leaving the connection between us as the singular, focused element in the room. A gentle warmth settled in my chest, the previous tension transforming into a sense of security, a realization that he had created a space where observation did not equate to scrutiny, and authority did not equate to pressure, but rather, to a measured awareness that invited cautious trust. I could feel the tether between us strengthen, delicate yet undeniable, formed not through words but through presence, through the deliberate, almost imperceptible attention he paid to the smallest details of my being. In that quiet, suspended space, I understood that the ordinary rhythms of my night had shifted irreversibly, that the subtle force of his focus had altered the environment itself, and that the moments yet to come would carry the weight of this calm authority, this attentive presence, and the promise that for the first time in a long while, I was not facing the night alone. The office felt transformed, the familiar fluorescent glow now softened by the subtle understanding that had developed between us, and I realized that the tension I had carried all evening had begun to melt into something quieter, steadier. Liam's presence was a constant, like a steady rhythm beneath the hum of computers and the soft patter of rain against the windows, and it created a strange sense of equilibrium in the room, a balance between alertness and calm that I had not expected. I noticed the way he adjusted his stance slightly, not with force, but with precision, each movement deliberate, conveying awareness and consideration, and it made the air between us feel more intimate in its focus, without crossing any boundaries or intruding on the small space I occupied. My hands rested lightly on the desk, fingertips brushing the smooth surface as I tried to process the complex emotions that had been building, a mixture of relief, curiosity, and the beginnings of trust, and I felt my pulse synchronize with the measured cadence of his attention. Outside, the drizzle had almost stopped, leaving the wet streets to reflect neon light in long, fractured patterns, and the faint sounds of the city, distant car horns, the hum of traffic, formed a backdrop that seemed to echo the delicate balance of observation and presence inside the office. Liam's gaze met mine for a moment longer than expected, steady and unwavering, yet not demanding, and I felt a connection form in that space, a silent acknowledgement that I was seen, that my efforts, my presence, my small hesitations were noted and understood without the need for words. Each breath I took felt heavier, more deliberate, filled with the awareness of the room and of him, and I realized that the ordinary environment had been altered subtly by his presence, by the quiet authority he exerted through observation alone. The gentle interplay of light and shadow across the room highlighted the contours of the space and of Liam's figure, reinforcing the quiet intensity of the moment, and I felt drawn into the rhythm of his measured attention, a rhythm that encouraged cautious reflection, awareness, and a tentative willingness to engage rather than retreat. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint shuffle of papers, the subtle creaks of the office furniture, all of it faded into insignificance compared to the palpable focus between us, a focus that did not demand compliance, but suggested protection, attentiveness, and deliberate patience. I noticed my own posture changing subtly, shoulders less tense, back straightening, as if my body were responding unconsciously to the assurance conveyed in his presence, and I felt the first real hint of possibility for the night, a sense that the ordinary expectations of isolation and dismissal no longer applied. Liam shifted again, almost imperceptibly, but enough to reinforce the quiet understanding forming between us, and I realized that in this still, charged space, a bond had begun to take shape, delicate yet undeniable, carrying with it the promise that the hours to come would unfold with a new rhythm, a rhythm shaped by attention, awareness, and an unspoken commitment to presence and steadiness. The night had settled fully around the office building, the soft glow of streetlights and the faint reflection of neon signs on wet asphalt forming a quiet perimeter that seemed to contain the intensity within. I remained seated, hands lightly resting on the desk, but I no longer felt tense. The rhythm of my breath had slowed, matched by the subtle cadence of Liam's presence across the room. He had moved to stand by the window, the soft light catching the edges of his dark suit, and the reflection in the glass mirrored the calm authority he exuded. The hum of computers, once sharp and intrusive, now became a gentle backdrop to the unspoken connection that had built steadily through the night, and I realized how profoundly the ordinary details, the slight flicker of fluorescent lights, the muted shuffle of papers, the distant hum of the city, had been transformed by the quiet gravity of his attention. Liam turned his gaze toward me again, his eyes meeting mine with the same deliberate focus that had defined our interaction from the start, and I felt the delicate tether between us strengthen, a silent thread woven through observation, patience, and subtle reassurance. Every subtle gesture, every precise movement of his hands, the slight shift of weight from one foot to the other, seemed imbued with meaning, signaling awareness, protection, and a presence that was at once commanding and gentle. The outside world, the drizzle reduced now to mere droplets clinging to the glass, seemed distant, almost irrelevant, as the room contracted into this quiet, charged space where ordinary hierarchies no longer applied, and the energy between us held a promise of attention and acknowledgement without intrusion. I allowed myself to lean slightly forward, a small but deliberate motion, and he responded with the faintest nod, a recognition that was neither patronizing nor demanding, but grounding, affirming my presence and the validity of my reactions in a way that was wholly unexpected. The subtle interplay of shadows across the walls and floors, the interplay of reflected light on his suit and the contours of his face, created a tableau that felt suspended in time, a visual echo of the trust and awareness that had quietly grown over the course of the evening. I felt my pulse steady, my thoughts organizing around the awareness of his careful attention, the deliberate absence of judgment, the quiet assurance that I was safe to exist fully in this space, without pretense or fear. The ordinary elements, the chair beneath me, the desk, the scattered papers, the faint buzz of lights, had become incidental, part of a larger rhythm that connected us in subtle, undeniable ways. I realized, with a sense of clarity that was almost startling, that the night had irrevocably shifted, that in the presence of someone who observed without imposing, who cared without demanding, the world itself had been altered, and that the hours to come would unfold within the framework of this new understanding, carrying the weight of awareness, quiet authority, and an unspoken, steady promise that I would no longer face the night alone.